A pleasant good morning to the Honorable John Briceño, Prime Minister of Belize, his ministers and ministers of state, to the Honorable Tracy Panton, Leader of the Opposition and members on her side of the House, and to all, Madam Speaker. Honorable members, let us pray. Almighty and eternal God, who through Jesus Christ has revealed his glory to all nations, please protect and preserve Belize, our beloved country. God of might, wisdom, and justice, please assist our Belizean government and people with your Holy Spirit of counsel and fortitude. Let the light of your divine wisdom direct their plans and endeavors, so that with your help we may attain our just objective. With your guidance, may all our endeavors tend to peace, social justice, liberty, national happiness, the increase of industry, sobriety, and useful knowledge. We pray, O God of mercy, for all of us, that we may be blessed in the knowledge and sanctified in the observance of your most holy law, that we may be preserved in the union and in the peace which the world itself cannot give. And after enjoying this life, the blessings of this life, please admit us, dear Lord, to that eternal reward, so that you have prepared for those who love you. Amen and amen.
Announcement by the Speaker.
Good morning, members. Apologies for the late start this morning. We received notices of absences from the member for Orange Walk South, who remains on sick leave, and the member for Corozal North. This meeting, members, will be carried over a period of 3 days. It's not 3 meetings, but 1 meeting being conducted over 3 days. We did receive a few notices of members who won't be present for the first day, but will be present for the remaining days of the budget debates, namely member for Fort George and member for Cayo South. As we are still in the Women's month of March, I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge all those who were involved with what has been termed a successful Young Women in Leadership Parliament forum, and it was held in these chambers on Friday. It culminated, I should say, in these chambers on Friday, the first time the chamber was filled with all women. And I have been receiving actually several messages from some of you as well as from members of the public on how that went off, and I thought it was only fitting for me to acknowledge it publicly. That was done, coordinated with the help of the Women's Parliamentary Caucus, Parlaméricas, and CWIL, as well as the Department of Youth Services in Belize. So together, all of them coordinated, and over 2 months worked with the young women who applied. I also received a few notices from varying members of the public based on the last meeting, and because of Women's Month, having acknowledged a few women in Belize, the message was that to a gentle reminder that the UN had designated this decade as the second UN International Decade for People of African Descent. And in that vein, if it would be fitting for me or appropriate for me, and I agreed, to also recognize, in addition to the names that we did at the last meeting, Belizean's Senator Venencia Petillo, Belizean Vivian Wilhelmines Maivet, C. Cleopatra White, Sadie Vernon, Creole icons Myrna Manzanares and Lila Vernon as well, to speak their name in the record of women who have helped to build this nation. And with that, Clerk, I conclude announcements for today's first sitting.
Papers.
I recognize the Honorable Prime Minister, Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I rise to present and lay on the table sessional paper number HR 69114, Fiscal Strategy Plan Fiscal Year 2025-2026 to Fiscal Year 2027-2028, Ministry of Finance, Government of Belize.
Honorable members, that paper is ordered to lie on the table. I recognize the Honorable Deputy Prime Minister.
To present and lay on the table sessional paper number HR 69A/1/14, Ministry of Infrastructure Development and Housing, 8th Road Project, George Price Highway, Belize City to Hattieville, and Belcan Bridge Replacement Project.
Honorable members, that paper is ordered to lie on the table. I recognize the Honorable Minister of Agriculture, Food Security. Honorable members, that paper is ordered to lie on the table.
Presentation of reports from Select Committee.
I recognize the Honorable Chairperson of the Finance and Economic Development Committee.
Good morning, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to lay on the table sessional papers number HR 70/1/14, report from the Finance and Economic Development Committee on the Internal Audit Bill 2026. Number HR 71/1/14, report from the Finance and Economic Development Committee on the Ombudsman Amendment Bill 2026. Number HR 72/1/14, report from the Finance and Economic Development Committee on the Contractor General Amendment Bill 2026. Number HR 73/1/14, report from the Finance and Economic Development Committee on the Inter-American Development Bank, IDB, CLIMA, strengthening marine ecosystem resilience by enhancing wastewater infrastructure in Keycaker, US $12.25 million, loan and guarantee motion 2026. Thank you.
Honorable members, those reports are ordered to lie on the table.
Motions relating to the business or sittings of the House.
I recognize the Honorable Minister of Human Development, Family Support and Gender Affairs.
Madam Speaker, this is a Domestic and Intimate Partner Violence Prohibition Bill 2026. I rise to introduce a bill for an act to recognize the right of all persons to live free of domestic violence and intimate partner violence, to expand the powers of the court, to make orders to support survivors, to increase accessibility to justice services, to fulfill Belize's commitments under international conventions for all persons to live free of violence, to repeal the Domestic Violence Act, Chapter 178 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Madam Speaker, this bill has the full recommendation of the Cabinet.
Honourable members, just a correction, the clerk had mentioned motions. That was actually introduction of bills. Honourable members, that bill is referred to the Health and Human Development Committee for examination, consideration and report.
Bill for an act to recognize the rights of all persons to live free of domestic violence and intimate partner violence, to expand the powers of the court, to make orders to support survivors, to increase accessibility to justice services, to fulfill Belize's commitments under international convention for all persons to live free of violence, to repeal the Domestic Violence Act, Chapter 178 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Motions relating to the business or sittings of the House.
I recognize the Honourable Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I move that at its rising today, the House suspends to Tuesday, 24th March 2026 at 10 a.m.
Honourable members, the question is that the House at its rising today adjourn to tomorrow, Tuesday 24th March 2026 at 10 a.m. All those in favour kindly say aye. Those against kindly say no. I think the ayes have it.
Public business, government business motions.
Honourable members, the debate on the second reading of the General Revenue Appropriation 2026-2027 Bill 2026 is about to be resumed. Before we begin, I would like to remind honourable members about Standing Order number 64, presentation and the second reading of the Appropriation Bill, especially paragraph 5, which reads, after the motion for the second reading of the Appropriation Bill has been resumed on the paragraph 4 of this Standing Order, the debate shall be confined to the financial and economic state of the country and the general principles of government policy and administration as indicated by the Appropriation Bill and the estimates. Matters are therefore asked to be confined. Members are therefore asked to confine their debate within the prescribed limits of the aforementioned Standing Order. I would like to remind honourable members of the other parts of the Standing Order, specifically, no surprise to any member, Standing Order number 42B, and that is, which states that an honourable member shall maintain silence while another member is speaking and shall not interrupt except in accordance with these standing orders. So we now have the resumption of the debate on the General Revenue Appropriation 2026-2027 Bill 2026. With your indulgence, I will ask for a brief suspension in order for us to allow for the necessary arrangements as has been standard before the debate on the budget is resumed, with the Leader of the Opposition leading off on the resumption. Thank you.
today on behalf of the parliamentary opposition to respond to the government's presentation on the 2026-2027 budget. I stand here today on behalf of the people of Belize, those hardworking men and women who struggle every day to make ends meet at a time when the headwinds are strong and at a time when the global geopolitical environment poses a direct threat to our social economic well-being and our national sovereignty. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister's reference to budgeting for Belizean prosperity must go beyond the greed of the privileged few and well-connected. One can agree that it is an appealing phrase, one we suppose is intended to inspire confidence and optimism. Our duty here is to review the numbers, the policies, and priorities behind these statements. When we do so carefully, when we move beyond the rhetoric and look squarely at the realities confronting many Belizean households, a vastly different picture begins to emerge. You see, Madam Speaker, prosperity is measured by the lived experience of our people. It is measured by whether a mother can afford to put food on the table for her children. It is measured when a young graduate can find meaningful work that will help them to realize their dreams and aspirations. It is measured by whether a small business owner can keep their doors open and not be weighed down by the spiraling cost of inputs and crushing taxes and fees imposed on doing business. It is measured by the safety and protection of our citizens in our homes, neighborhoods, and city streets. The reality many of us are facing, Madam Speaker, is unmistakable, palpable. Too many of us are working harder than ever, yet feeling as though we are falling further behind. Social security contributions made by the working class are currently being reviewed and are anticipated to be, quote unquote, recalibrated in the coming fiscal year. The jury is still out on what that will mean for contributors. But if we follow the prevailing trend, we can expect for contributions to go up. These are not abstract economic indicators. These are the daily realities of our people. Yet, Madam Speaker, in a budget the size of $1.92 billion in expenditure, an ambitious one, we search in vain for a comprehensive strategy aimed at reducing costs of living for families, the costs of production for small farmers and local producers, the costs of doing business for young entrepreneurs. It is as though, Madam Speaker, putting these estimates together, the government was completely out of touch, even aloof to the emerging global economic pressures, and even worse, impotent in finding innovative solutions to the hardships we continue to face. If, I repeat, if the prosperity is the objective of this budget, then surely prosperity must be felt where it matters the most, in our pockets. Madam Speaker, let us take a closer look at this year's budget estimates. Total revenues and grants, $1.79 billion $1.79 billion. Of this amount, $1.58 billion is generated from consumption taxes, which places the burden on the working class. GST being the largest contributor to the consolidated revenue fund. $6.7 million come primarily from capital revenues via the sale of Crown land and the government's equity from various publicly owned businesses, BTL being one of those entities. Total expenditure, $1.92 billion, an increase of over $200 million. $189 million is allocated in interest payments, $57.3 million more than last year, and $140 million for principal payments, $14 million more than this current fiscal year. The overall deficit is $110.3 million, up from $34.1 million. Deficits are financed either by more government borrowing or alternatively by increases in taxes and fees for the delivery of government services. Public debt stands at $4.676 billion with a B, of which 64% is owed to external creditors. Those are lending institutions outside of Belize. And 36% is owed to local lenders, including the Social Security Board and the Central Bank. For the year 2025, both the IMF and the World Bank estimated GDP at $6.6 billion, a 1.5% growth in Belize's economy, and not the 1.9% noted in the Prime Minister's budget presentation on March the 10th. Gross domestic product is a monetary metric that represents the total market value of all final goods and services produced and provided for within a country during a specific period. The Prime Minister also proudly boasts that inflationary costs had fallen to 1.1% this year, which does not accurately represent what Belizeans are feeling in their pockets for basic commodities. In the last few months, everything from fuel at the pumps, to water rates, to electricity rates, to grocery items, to rent expenses, to property and trade license fees have all seen marked increases. Every Belizean is singing the same tune. A family of 4 can no longer live on $100 per week. Nowhere in his speech, Madam Speaker, did the PM proclaim that our Belizeans are enjoying more purchasing power. Even the most recent increases in minimum wage from $3.30 per hour to $5, lauded by the government as a manifesto commitment delivered to Belizeans and paid out by employers, not government, unless you are hired by the public service, has now been negated by sharp increases in the cost of living. As it is now, 41% of every dollar spent on the price per gallon of regular fuel and 46% on premium prices go directly into the government's coffers from revenue replacement tax, import duties, excise tax, environmental tax, and GST. While liquid petroleum stocks, better known as butane, are now spared, well, until today, from the PM's insatiable appetite, it is only a matter of time today that the cost of butane will be increased and be touted as necessary due to unpredictable global developments. The stated unemployment rate also appears questionable. It should be noted that this figure represents 2% of individuals actively seeking employment. The figure does not accurately, however, reflect reality. Nowhere, and I mean nowhere, in Belize can you gather a group of 100 individuals who fulfill all the requirements for employment and expect to find any situation in which 98 of them are gainfully employed. There are persistent challenges facing Belize's labor market. Despite meeting employment qualifications, a sizable population remains unable to secure stable, long-standing jobs. Madam Speaker, as the Prime Minister likes to say, let us state the obvious. Government is spending more than it earns. The notion of a surplus is artificial, as it excludes debt obligations. As we indicated before, every Belizean household shoulders a deficit budget. Translated into simpler terms, 1 in every $7 this government spends is going to financing our public debt. After years of undue fiscal adjustments by the Belizean people, this administration has effectively signaled that they are now reversing course. Plan Belize 2.0, Madam Speaker, promised a new phase of economic dynamism for Belize. It spoke of building economic capacity to sustain great growth rates above 5% annually. Such growth would allow Belize to expand employment opportunities for our rapidly growing young population, strengthen the middle class, and support higher wages across our economy. Madam Speaker, this budgeting for prosperity that the Prime Minister boasted about in his presentation is a farce. Prosperity should be generated through economic diversification, through investments, through growth of existing industries that serves as the main pillars of our economy, and support for new and emerging ones. Madam Speaker, as of January of this year, 2026, Belize recorded a trade deficit of $251.5 million. This brings into sharp focus the value of goods we import exceeds the value of goods we export. Export expansion, sector diversification, and productivity growth remain limited. Strategic economic planning is vital for Belize to address major global challenges. Madam Speaker, where is Belize's comprehensive manufacturing expansion strategy? How can we develop a productive agro-productive sector? Where is the roadmap for developing a digital economy capable of providing high-value employment? Where is Belize's forward-looking strategy to compete in key sectors of the global 21st century economy? Or the planned investments in innovation and technology that will support our farmers to become the primary food chain providers of our region? This issue is straightforward, Madam Speaker. Belize cannot achieve sustained prosperity with only a modest 2% growth rate. Belize is a nation with immense potential, abundant resources, wealth untold, and should set its sights higher. Socioeconomic policy should prioritize not only stability, but also the advancement of Belize's productivity, competitiveness, and growth driven by investment. Madam Speaker, we recognize that Belize's economy is influenced by global events. Madam Speaker, this administration seemed to have believed that ignoring the global political changes would have somehow insulated us from their inevitable effects. In a word, Madam Speaker, this is incredulous. The Prime Minister's budget figures are inapt and out of touch for the times we're living in even before these budget estimates were delivered. Rising tensions in the Middle East and the ongoing war in Iran have caused volatility in global oil markets. For Belize, fluctuation in oil prices translate quickly, well before a new shipment arrives in port. We're seeing real pressures coming to bear. Just last week, Madam Speaker, an unregistered oil tanker with 50,000 gallons of diesel was detained at the Blue Creek port in Belize. Allegedly, Madam Speaker, the contraband was sourced by a fuel station owner in northern Belize. Yet we have not heard a peep from the authorities responsible, save and accept that the tanker and its cargo was seized by the government. Investigations, we understand, are ongoing. Madam Speaker, before I proceed any further with the details outlined in the draft revenue and expenditure for the fiscal year 2026-2027, I wish to share with Belizeans our lived experience in Albert. Madam Speaker, the Albert constituency receives $10,000 monthly from the Consolidated Fund via the Constituency Development Fund. The resources are used to support registered voters and others in Albert. We use this money along with contributions from private donors to offset healthcare expenses such as prescribed medications, lab tests and imaging services, and access to specialized care. It is used to help cover school activity fees, buy uniforms, textbooks, and supplies, support community groups aiding vulnerable individuals, fund micro and home-based businesses, assist with urgent housing repairs, provide skill training for single-parent households, offer funeral grants for loved ones, support community engagement initiatives and community workers, and give rent assistance when we can. Rental rates have risen, reducing the affordability for families. The moment has arrived to introduce regulations for this sector. We continue to allocate these funds efficiently and to assist as many individuals as possible. Madam Speaker, we also administer a monthly grocery bag assistance program provided via the Office of the Prime Minister, totaling $5,000, which provides food vouchers valued at $50 each to 100 Albert families every month. The nominal contribution helps to buy the basics: eggs, rice, beans, flour, and sugar. every contribution plays a significant role in providing meaningful support to families on the brink of poverty. Madam Speaker, we continue to face challenges in obtaining land access for first-time property owners. The Lands Department will only accept applications that include a recommendation letter from a current area representative. Madam Speaker, this policy contradicts the government's promise to streamline land application and acquisition. This goes against the manifesto's pledge to reduce ministerial involvement in public services for all Belizeans. Madam Speaker, I can offer several examples where these commitments were not offered to future landowners. What I find particularly concerning is the deliberate attempt to appeal to young voters in constituencies to transfer votes in constituencies represented by PUP standard bearers and caretakers by providing them with access to land. An individual's place of residence should not impede access to vital government services. Madam Speaker, despite it being illegal, for KHMH to withhold proof of birth, young parents still face difficulties obtaining it for newborns. Madam Speaker, this practice causes additional hardships for young families. Birth registrations, access to Social Security cards for their children needed to access NHI facilities and early childhood education. Madam Speaker, the government recently enacted legislation raising birth registration fees and imposing strict penalties for late registration without considering the systemic issues parents face at public institutions or the hardships these fees increases cause on families. We are still dedicated to collaborating with the appropriate authorities to make sure this issue, that of proof of birth, is settled completely and decisively. On a more positive note, Madam Speaker, we do acknowledge that when specifically requested, Albert residents have been recipients of life-saving oncology services, dialysis treatment, and emergency procedures through the Patient Care Assistance Program available by the Ministry of Health and Wellness. Albert students, I am very fair member for Toledo West. I am very fair. Albert students in primary, secondary, and tertiary institutions have received tuition grants from the Ministry of Education. These tuition grants provide the support infrastructure for young minds to be meaningfully engaged to ensure that they can become productive citizens of Belize. Madam Speaker, on behalf of the beneficiaries of these programs, we take the opportunity to express our gratitude to the Prime Minister and his executive for the support afforded to our constituents. Madam Speaker, the primary issue facing families in Albert and in approximately 80% of families we on this side of the House represent, and I believe it would be true for the representatives on the government side, is the rising cost of living. The government revenue system plays a key role in this reality. According to the budget estimates, the government will depend primarily on indirect taxes, consumption taxes, for its revenue. The estimated amount of GST is $485 million. Excise duties at $245 million. Environmental tax at $70 million. Taxes on foreign currency transactions at $53 million. Import duties at $160.8 million. Property taxes will see a marked increase from $6.4 million to $9 million. The estimated total tax revenue is estimated at $1.581 billion. As previously noted, these taxes are included in the cost of essential goods and services. They influence the cost of fuel, transportation, construction, materials, food, and a wide variety of consumables. When government revenue relies on consumption, ordinary Belizeans bear the burden. That is the simple fact. Madam Speaker, in Plan Belize and Plan Belize 2.0, Belizeans were promised meaningful tax reform. Many swallowed that bait hook, line, sinker, rod, and reel. The government pledged to take legislative action to enable the central bank to make targeted, incentive-based market interventions to reduce lending rates, to reduce business tax, to eliminate environmental tax on inputs for products manufactured in Belize, to abolish the contract tax, and to provide land tax credit for farmers and for land under cultivation or in the use of livestock. As of now, the Income and Business Tax Act, specifically Section 112, still mandates a withholding tax of 3% on all gross contract payments, providing no meaningful relief. Essential commitments to poverty reduction, tax reform, and lowering the trade deficit have been completely overlooked. In replacement, Belizeans receive GST-free tax weekends twice a year for back to school and Christmas. Madam Speaker, the Ministry of Finance touts this initiative as a badge of some sort of special distinction. We urge this ministry to provide comprehensive tax relief instead of one-time individual measures. Madam Speaker, I will now provide a more in-depth analysis of the budgetary priorities outlined by this administration. Affordable, quality health care is increasingly difficult for workers. More funding is welcome if it prioritizes patient care over personal gain. The health and wellness budget is just under $200 million, with $102 million for recurrent expenditure, $95 million for CAP 2, and $2.5 million for CAP 3 support. Most of the recurrent expenditure represents salaries and emoluments, while CAP 2 is classified by the reclassification of a $33 million subsidy committed to KHMH and $52 million for the purchase of medical and pharmaceutical supplies. It is important for the Belizean people to note that there is no previously established precedence where such reclassification has been done for medical supplies. Madam Speaker, with a sum of $52 million allocated to central medical stores, a $20 million increase from this year, no Belizean should be denied care at any public care facility or at the KHMH due to shortages of basic medication and supplies. No Belizean, Madam Speaker, should be given a list of supplies required before an emergency surgical procedure can be scheduled. We can all remember, not so long ago, when our nurses and doctors countrywide staged a walkout protesting the shortage of both staff and medical supplies. Basic items, gauze, medical tape, Tylenol, basic diabetic and hypertensive medicines were not available to sick patients. In 2024-2025, there were reported 25 separate instances of out-of-stock inventory at central medical stores. Aside from the $19.1 million investment proposed for the state-of-the-art hospital facility to be provided by our friends of the Republic of China, Taiwan in San Pedro, this year's budget falls short of improvement to healthcare facilities. No new investments are envisioned for the country's #1 referral hospital in Belize City, which desperately needs a roof, we are told by hospital officials. No mention of the rebuilding or replacement of the polyclinic in Port Leola. No sums allocated for district public hospitals, save a $167,000 proposed pediatric wing at the Northern Regional Hospital in Orange Walk. Madam Speaker, equal and equitable health care services must be for all government institutions. Madam Speaker, another critical concern is the minimal sum of 100.8 million, 101 million, that has been allocated for health training. This translates, Madam Speaker, to no major expansion in specialized medical training, increasing rural healthcare capacity, designated scholarships for locally trained nurses, doctors, technicians, and other healthcare auxiliary providers. These raises another fundamental concern. How do we intend to address adequate patient care if Belize yields to the pressure of the United States to end its long-standing partnership with the Cuban Medical Brigade? We have always shown profound respect and regard for our friends, our allies, our international partners who have consistently helped us in the arduous work of nation building. It is deeply troubling that both our democracy and our sovereignty are at risk if we do not unfollow the unreasonable demands of those who seek to have unbridled power in this hemisphere. Our government has been read the Riot Act. We have been reliably informed that the Prime Minister has been given a firm timeline in which to act on the requests related to the Cuban Medical Brigade, or be exposed to consequences of visa restrictions, revocations, restrictions on travel and tourism, and trade sanctions. Madam Speaker, our foreign policy outlook does not have to be loud, confrontational, or dismissive, but it must remain, at the very least, principled. Those of us on this side of the House recognize the strategic importance of all our friends, the United States of America being no exception. Here's the premise from which we note our concern. Friends respect friends. Friendship should not be used to create power imbalances, justify political actions, or inflict egregious harm on humanity. Who, I ask, who will provide health services in our rural and remote communities, or provide specialist care to those who cannot afford access? In speaking to our UDP caretaker in Toledo West this past weekend, yes, I checked with him because I couldn't find you. He shared the concern that there are no doctors or nurses permanently stationed in the 28 villages that comprises this constituency. This is problematic, I try to call you. Patient care is arranged for designated hours on specific days each month. Severing ties with the Cuban Medical Brigade would only exacerbate the challenges they already face. Madam Speaker, we are privy to the fact that a group of locally concerned healthcare professionals wrote to the Ministry of Health and Wellness just shy of 6 years ago, expressing their grave concern on Belize's continued reliance on external support for healthcare services, and went further. They offered recommendations on how this matter could be addressed. As we understand it, the recommendations were either ignored or were placed in file 13, as those concerned doctors, one of whom I met with this weekend, are still awaiting a response. What is the government's strategy to train and retain nurses so they opt to stay here in Belize and not be recruited by developed countries? We cannot strengthen the health system if we do not invest in the people who deliver care. There are zero investments in mental health facilities despite 16,000 consultations per year. $0 allocated for specialized equipment and infrastructure upgrades have seen a sizable budget reduction from 900,000 to 100,000. I would be remiss, Madam Speaker, if I did not call your attention to the lack of budgeting for critical care services. For the third consecutive year, there has been no increase in the allocation for dialysis treatment, even though there's a growing demand for these services. We must expand our oncology services, particularly as it relates to pediatric oncology support. Our young patients must seek cancer care services outside of the country. Madam Speaker, we acknowledge and we thank Dr. Yakab and the oncology unit at the KHMH for their outstanding work in delivering cancer care to adult patients. Madam Speaker, my colleague representing Queen Square will offer a more comprehensive analysis of the $57 million designated for NHI during his intervention on Wednesday. However, we take this opportunity to formally request an audit of the NHI financial statements. To the best of our knowledge, there has been no audit conducted since 2020. The system is operating without any accountability. Even though an oversight body has been convened with a member recommended by the opposition, the Commission still hasn't received budgeted allocation for NHI services this year. As a result, it cannot conduct or provide feedback, despite requesting the information several times. We call on the Ministry of Health and Wellness and the Commission's chairman to make the proposed budget available post haste in the interest of transparency and accountability. The government expects that 325,000 people in Belize will sign up as active NHI service users. This, Madam Speaker, represents a little over 80% of those of us who require primary health care services. We agree with you, Prime Minister, that a healthy nation is a wealthy one. A healthy population maximizes productivity. About 70% of patients are treated by private or will be treated by PCPs, private care providers, who have major health service contracts, while the remaining 30% will visit established clinics such as Cleopatra White and Matron Roberts. Madam Speaker, this proposal does not, in our view, constitute healthcare reform. Rather, it represents state-funded privatization of health care delivery. The Prime Minister says that healthcare is an entitlement, but the draft NHI legislation that now sits in committee introduces mandatory taxpayer contributions. Madam Speaker, we all know the adage, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. Madam Speaker, a reclassified budget and a shift of healthcare funds into private hands under the guise of NHI is a public healthcare system in decline. Allowing public facilities to deteriorate further jeopardizes the future of sustainable primary health care. Affordable, quality health care is still a challenge for far too many.
Leader of Opposition, I'll just ask for your indulgence so we dispense, since it's about 11:45 with the Standing Order 12. Correct.
Madam Speaker, in accordance with Standing Order 12.8, I move that the proceedings on the order paper may be entered upon and proceeded with at this day's sitting at any hour though opposed.
All members, the question is that the proceedings on the order paper may be entered upon and proceeded with at this day's sitting at any hour though opposed. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Those against, kindly say no. I think the ayes have it.
The sum of $314.6 million has been allocated for education. The Prime Minister budget presentation purports. These sums would seek to accelerate system-wide transformation and protect the well-being of our teachers, ensuring tangible results for students, education, and the nation. End of quote. Yet, there are no meaningful education reform initiatives, such as nationwide school infrastructure upgrade program to accommodate our growing student population, no budgeted allocation for national teacher training, no allocation for the digitization of classrooms in either our urban areas or rural communities, no aggressive literacy and numeracy intervention plan, no nationwide competency assessments to gauge how our academic institutions and students are performing, no strategic teacher retention programs. Madam Speaker, just as we saw with our nurses, our skilled teachers are being recruited to teach in developed nations across the globe. Madam Speaker, because of inadequate planning, teachers are stretched too thin. Classrooms are overcrowded, and there is still a lack of resources. We all know that education is not free. The plan believes manifesto commitment for free education from preschool to sixth form was a fabrication from the start. Madam Speaker, our students gain advantages from tuition grants, subsidies provided to public academic institutions, feeding programs, bus transportation, and other similar initiatives. However, church-state institutions impose fees for additional educational services that often surpass the cost of tuition, creating financial challenges for families who are already struggling to meet these expenses. The issue is not about spending money to fulfill our salary commitments to teachers. What matters more is considering transformative strategies to invest in our educators, modernizing our schools, and preparing students so they can help drive Belize's future economic growth. My colleague from myself, Madam Speaker, will address infrastructure investments in detail during his intervention tomorrow. The United Democratic Party has always maintained infrastructure development is both important and necessary. I remember when the rallying cry in this House by the opposition, by the then opposition, was, "We cannot eat streets." You remember that? I'm sure you remember that. I remember that very well. Roads, bridges, and transportation networks are vital in economic growth and national connectivity. No responsible opposition, of which we consider ourselves, would oppose investments in the nation's infrastructure upgrades. Conversely, Belize should be confident that infrastructure investments are managed transparently and responsibly, ensuring that every dollar spent delivers real value. The 200 million allocated for road maintenance, drainage works, and other infrastructure upgrades across the country should come with transparent details, such as the cost per mile of road, cost per bridge, tender procedures, contractor selection methods, and a comparison between final project delivery costs and original estimates. This request ought to be straightforward and should not require private conversations in the minister's office initiated by a member of the opposition. Regardless of whether investments are funded through the consolidated fund or via loans and grants, the government is using public resources and must, I say must, ensure full disclosure in Parliament. In the People's United Party's Plan Belize manifesto, Madam Speaker, this administration promised to establish the gold standard for transparency and accountability. The people of Belize are still waiting patiently, Madam Speaker. If the mishandling of the proposed BTL acquisition of SpeedNet and Smart is any indication, Madam Speaker, or the fact that we do not have a single audited financial report in hand to review for this current administration, 5+ years and counting, we still have a distance to travel. Setting precise benchmarks and implementing oversight on loan fund usage will strengthen trust among both current and future generations who bear the responsibility, Madam Speaker, for repaying these loans. Madam Speaker, the government has proposed a $900 million upgrade in the port of Belize, in Belize City, which can be characterized as ambitious, but lacking adequate transparency. The proposed development is called transformational and seeks to modernize cargo operations, increase cruise tourism, create jobs, improve working conditions, support coastal protection, and regenerate Belize City's south side. The touting of this large-scale facility attempts to entirely dismiss other cruise port facilities which received government's clearance. The Stake Bank project, Madam Speaker, received bipartisan support and parliamentary approval back in 2014 when the Stake Bank Cruise Ship Docking Facility Development Act of 2014 was approved. The Act of Parliament granted fiscal incentives and authorized the project as a public interest initiative. Then there was a mysterious approval of an environmental impact assessment and the acceptance of a mysteriously signed definitive agreement of the Portico project, embraced by the now Prime Minister and a group of, in his words, senior colleagues for the development of a second cruise tourism facility. Madam Speaker, after the Prime Minister was discovered behaving inappropriately, he quickly withdrew from the agreement in these chambers, hoping to separate himself from a deal that his ministry had unsuccessfully sought approval and backing from his executive. The pushback, Madam Speaker, came from his own cabinet members, those sitting across the aisle. It is sufficient to say that the government's handling of the need for a modern shoreside cruise port facility for central Belize has been nothing short of a calamity. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister's interference in private investments, I think of Serene Development, Madam Speaker. I think of investments in Stake Bank, Madam Speaker. I think of what is now happening in the north with the coercion by government to have farmers withdraw their legal claims from BSI, ASR, and Tate and Lyle. The Prime Minister's interference in the affairs of private investors, in his attempt to stave off other initiatives to promote interests of his own, has exposed Belize's reputation to grave risk, our investment reputation. When the country's top office treats local investors with such disdain and disregard, interfering in the business of private sector-led investments, it sends a strong signal for foreign investors to proceed with extreme caution. Madam Speaker, the budget estimates excludes funds allocated for forthcoming government legal challenges that are apparent. Madam Speaker, the State Bank developers have stated categorically that they refuse to withdraw their interests until a legal review at the highest court addresses alleged government interference in their negotiated agreements with a local banking institution. Madam Speaker, it is deeply troubling when the highest office in our nation deliberately misrepresents correspondence received from a U.S. congressman. By portraying such communication as a broad and sweeping endorsement of his administration's policy decisions, the government sends a misleading signal to the public. This act suggests that those in charge may be losing their grip on effective leadership and are responding to mounting pressures from a place of desperation rather than reasoned governance. Such misrepresentation undermines public trust and should trigger a no confidence vote in this sitting administration. For the avoidance of any doubt, Madam Speaker, those of us on this side of the House support the 4% salary increase for public officers, teachers, security personnel, and healthcare workers. These increases provide welcome relief for the working class who are committed to providing services to the public. In this year's estimates, approximately $651.9 million have been allocated for salary and wages, while pension and ex gratia payments are projected at